A rich kid secretly houses a homeless man in his home. One day, the boy's father comes home from work and discovers him. Watch the father's reaction when he sees such a situation. It was a warm, sunny afternoon when Mateo, a 10-year-old boy, left the private school he attended. Mateo came from a wealthy family. His parents were successful entrepreneurs who had provided him with all kinds of comforts and opportunities. However, despite growing up surrounded by luxuries and privileges, Mateo had developed a deep sensitivity and empathy that set him apart from other children in his environment. As he walked the streets home, Mateo used to look around carefully. He was struck by the diversity of people and situations that crossed his path. He saw mothers struggling to raise their children, workers striving in their trades, and also quite often homeless people sleeping on the sidewalks or begging. On that occasion, passing by a park, Mateo made out a man curled up on the ground, covered in rags and seemingly asleep. He stopped for a moment, feeling moved by the scene. He knew it wasn't the first time he had seen someone in that situation, but something in that image troubled him deeply. With cautious steps, Mateo approached the man. As he got closer, he could notice his haggard features and unkempt appearance. His heart sank at the thought of the difficulties that person must be going through. Without hesitation, he crouched down beside him and watched him closely, trying to figure out if he was conscious or needed help. "Sir, are you okay?" Mateo asked softly, afraid to wake him. The man slowly opened his eyes and focused his gaze on the boy in front of him. His sad and tired eyes conveyed a deep loneliness. It took him a few seconds to react, but he finally gave a weak smile. "Yes, boy, I'm fine. Just resting for a while," replied the man in a hoarse voice. Mateo looked closely at the homeless man. His ragged and dirty clothes, his calloused hands, and his unkempt beard evidenced the harsh conditions in which he lived. However, despite his disheveled appearance, the boy could perceive in him a certain dignity and nobility. "Are you hungry? Do you need anything?" Mateo asked with genuine concern. The man looked at him in surprise, as if he was not used to anyone taking an interest in his well-being. Then he smiled sadly and replied, "Thank you, boy. Actually, I don't have anything right now, but I appreciate your kindness." Mateo couldn't help but feel a pang of pain upon hearing those words. He imagined how hard it must be for that man to have to deal with lack and loneliness day after day. At that moment, he made a decision. "Listen, why don't you come with me to my house? There you can rest and eat something," Mateo offered with a sincere smile. The man looked at him incredulously, not knowing how to react to this unexpected proposal. "To your house? But won't your parents mind?" he asked cautiously. "Don't worry, they won't know. Let's go. I assure you, you will be more comfortable there," Mateo insisted, holding out his hand to help him up. The homeless man hesitated for a moment, but finally accepted Mateo's hand and stood up with difficulty. Together, they began to walk in the direction of the luxurious residence where the boy lived. During the journey, Mateo watched the man out of the corner of his eye, who seemed bewildered and fearful. He understood that his proposal must have seemed strange and suspicious to him, but he was determined to help him in some way. When they reached the entrance to the house, Mateo made sure that there was no one in sight and quickly led the homeless man to the back door. Stealthily, he opened the door and invited him in. Once inside, the man looked around in amazement, as if he had never been in such an elegant and cozy place. "Welcome to my home," Mateo whispered with a smile. The homeless man cautiously observed everything around him, as if he was afraid of breaking something or being discovered at any moment. "Boy, I don't know what to say. You are very kind, but I cannot accept your invitation. I am afraid of causing trouble," the man replied with concern. "Please don't worry. My parents won't find out. You can stay here and rest as long as you need," Mateo insisted, leading him to one of the guest rooms. After some doubts, the homeless man ended up giving in to the insistence and kindness of the boy. Once inside the comfortable and clean room, he collapsed on the bed, sighing with relief. Mateo watched him with satisfaction, feeling happy to be able to provide a little comfort to this person who clearly needed it. "Make yourself at home. I'll get you something to eat," Mateo said softly. The man nodded silently, and Mateo left the room quickly, trying not to make a sound to prevent his parents from noticing the presence of the unexpected guest. Once in the kitchen, Mateo hastened to make a sandwich and pour a glass of juice. He knew he had to be careful and discreet, as his parents would be home soon. With the plate and glass in hand, he returned to the room where he had left the homeless man. Upon entering, he found the man sitting on the bed, gazing in amazement at the details of the luxurious room. Seeing him, the homeless man gave him a grateful look. "Boy, I have no way to thank you for all this. I never imagined that someone like you could be so kind to me," said the man in an emotional voice. "You don't have to thank me for anything. I'm glad to be able to help you," replied Mateo with a smile, handing him the plate and the glass. The homeless man took the food with trembling hands as if he was afraid that everything would disappear at any moment. He began to eat with great appetite, demonstrating how hungry he was. Mateo watched him in silence, noting how the man devoured each bite with a desperation that broke his heart. Seeing him in that situation made him reflect on the enormous inequality that existed in the world and on the need for the most fortunate people to strive to help those in need. Once he finished eating, the homeless man set the plate aside and looked at Mateo with bright eyes. "Boy, I don't know how to thank you for all this. You have been so kind to me, a complete stranger." "I can't understand why you did it," said the man, visibly moved. Mateo went up to him and put a hand on his shoulder, looking at him sincerely. "Because you needed it, and because I believe that we all deserve a little help and compassion when we need it most," the boy replied with wisdom beyond his years. The homeless man looked at him in wonder, touched by the generosity and depth of the little boy's words. He felt a warmth invade his heart, something he had not experienced for a long time. "Boy, you are an exceptional being. I would like to know more about you and your family. I must confess that I feel somewhat ashamed to have accepted your hospitality," said the man humbly. Mateo smiled at him understandingly and sat down next to him on the bed. "You don't have to feel ashamed. I am glad to be able to help you. And as for my family, well, they are busy and successful people. Sometimes I feel like I don't get as much attention as I would like, but I understand that they have a lot of responsibilities," Mateo explained with a certain sadness. The homeless man nodded silently, watching the boy with deep empathy. He could perceive in his words a loneliness and a need for affection that moved him. "I understand, boy. Sometimes the luckiest people are the ones who most need company and affection. I am glad that you have decided to share a little of your home with me," said the man, placing a hand on Mateo's shoulder. Mateo smiled gratefully at those words and lay down next to the homeless man, letting the warmth and security that the man conveyed comfort him. For a few moments he forgot about social differences and the worries that sometimes overwhelmed him, and simply enjoyed the company of that man who, despite his situation, seemed to have a wisdom and strength that inspired him. Meanwhile, downstairs in the house, Mateo's parents had just arrived home from work. The mother, an elegant and refined woman, took off her high heels and hung her coat on the rack, sighing wearily. "Another exhausting day. Where is Mateo? I hope he hasn't gotten into any trouble again," she said, addressing her husband. The father, a businessman with a serious appearance, approached his wife and kissed her gently on the cheek. "Don't worry, honey. He's probably in his room doing his homework. I'm going to see if he needs anything," he replied, heading for the stairs. As he went upstairs, Mateo's father was thinking about how hard he had worked to give his son a life full of opportunities and privileges. He knew that sometimes the boy felt lonely and a little overwhelmed by the demands of the family, but he was confident that in time he would find his own way. When he reached the second floor, the father went to Mateo's room and knocked softly on the door. "Mateo, are you there? It's Dad. Can I come in?" he asked aloud. Inside the guest room, Mateo and the homeless man were startled to hear the father's voice. Mateo got out of bed quickly, his heart racing. "Oh no, it's my dad! Quick, you have to hide!" Mateo whispered, pointing to a closet at the back of the room. The homeless man, without wasting a second, got up and hastened to hide in the closet, closing the door behind him. Mateo took a deep breath and went to the door, opening it cautiously. "Hi, Dad. I was doing my homework," Mateo lied, trying to sound as convincing as possible. Mateo's father looked at him with a mixture of concern and distrust. "Okay, I'm glad. Come down for dinner when you're done," replied the man, still not entirely convinced. "Sure, Dad, I'll be right down," Mateo said, mustering a nervous smile. His father nodded and headed back downstairs, leaving Mateo plunged into growing anguish. Once alone, the boy hurried back to the guest room and opened the closet door. "Are you okay? Did he see you?" the homeless man asked with concern. "No, he didn't see me, But I have to get you out of here before my parents realize you are here, Mateo replied, feeling guilty for having to ask the man to leave. The homeless man nodded understandingly and came out of the closet. He looked around once more as if wanting to engrave every detail of that luxurious room in his memory. I understand, boy. I don't want to cause you any trouble. I am infinitely grateful for your generosity and kindness, said the man, placing a hand on Mateo's shoulder. Mateo looked at him sadly, wishing he could do more for him. Do you have somewhere to go? Do you need me to help you in any way? The boy asked, feeling helpless in the face of the homeless man's difficult situation. The man smiled sadly and shook his head. Don't worry, boy. I'm used to managing on my own, but I appreciate your concern, he replied, heading for the door. Mateo walked him to the door in silence, his heart sinking as he watched the person who, in such a short time, had managed to move him deeply. Leave. Thank you very much for everything, boy. God bless you, said the homeless man, shaking Mateo's hand gratefully. Mateo nodded, struggling to hold back the tears that threatened to escape his eyes. Take good care of yourself. I hope you come by again, Mateo replied, wishing he could do more for him. The man gave him one last smile and then was lost in the shadows of the night. Mateo stood at the entrance, watching the homeless man walk away. A deep feeling of regret washed over him as he wished he could have done more for that man. Seeing him leave caused him indescribable sadness, as if he had lost a friend. With a sigh, Mateo closed the door and headed back to his room. Upon arriving, he sat on the bed, absorbed in his thoughts. He couldn't stop thinking about the homeless man's situation and the enormous inequality that existed in the world. How was it possible that some people had everything and others lacked even the basics? Mateo remembered the man's weary look and sad smile, and his heart sank once more. He wished he could have done more for him, perhaps invite him to stay a little longer or help him find a place to spend the night. At that moment, he heard a knock on his bedroom door. Startled, he replied, Yes? The door opened, and his father poked his head in. Mateo, everything okay? Your mother and I are waiting for you to have dinner, said the man, looking at him with concern. Mateo swallowed, feeling his heart pounding. Yes, Dad, I'm coming down, he replied, trying to sound casual. His father watched him for a moment as if he wanted to read him. It's going to be fine, Mateo insisted, trying to reassure his father with a smile. Yeah, it's fine. I was just finishing up some homework, but I'm coming now, he said. His father nodded, still with a hint of doubt on his face, but finally left, closing the door behind him. Mateo let out a sigh of relief. For a moment there, he'd been afraid his father might have suspected something. Now that his dad was gone, his thoughts returned to the homeless man and everything that had happened. He got out of bed and went to the window, looking out at the dark and deserted street. Where was the man now? Had he found a safe place to spend the night? The uncertainty gnawed at him. He knew he should go downstairs to have dinner with his parents. But right now, all that mattered to him was the fate of that stranger he had tried to help. He couldn't stop thinking about him in the difficult situation he was in. With a lump in his throat, Mateo went to the door and left his room. As he walked to the dining room, he tried to hide his worry and sadness. He didn't want his parents to notice that anything was bothering him. When he reached the dining room, he found his parents already seated at the table, ready to enjoy dinner. There you are, Mateo. Come on, sit down and join us, his mother invited him with a warm smile. Mateo obeyed and sat down opposite them, trying to focus on the conversation and the food. But his mind kept wandering, worried about the fate of the homeless man. During dinner, his parents talked about their respective jobs and projects, and Mateo answered in monosyllables when asked. He was too wrapped up in his thoughts to actively participate in the conversation. At one point, his father looked at him curiously. Is something wrong, Mateo? You seem a little distracted, he commented. Mateo was startled and shook his head. No, Dad, I'm fine. Just a little tired, he replied, trying to sound convincing. His mother watched him with concern. If you're not feeling well, you can go to bed. We'll finish dinner, she offered. Mateo hastened to shake his head again. No, really, I'm fine. Just a little pensive, that's all, he said, forcing a smile. His parents exchanged a worried look but didn't push it any further. They continued eating in silence, oblivious to their son's distress. Once dinner was over, Mateo excused himself and retired to his room. Alone again, he collapsed onto the bed, unable to hold back the tears that welled up in his eyes. He felt powerless and frustrated that he couldn't have done more for the homeless man. How could there be people who lacked even the basics in such an abundant world? The unfairness of it all filled him with sadness and anger. He buried his face in the pillow, sobbing quietly, while wondering what he could do to help the person who had moved him so much. He couldn't stop thinking about the homeless man and the difficult life he must be leading. After a while, Mateo managed to calm down a little. He got out of bed and went to the window, looking out at the dark night. He hoped that somehow the homeless man had found a safe place to spend the night. Determined, Mateo promised himself that he would do everything he could to find him again and help him in some way. It didn't matter how hard it was. He was determined to do something to improve that man's situation. That night, Mateo had a lot of trouble falling asleep. His mind wouldn't stop racing, imagining where the homeless man might be and how he could help. Exhausted by his anxiety and worry, he finally fell asleep, hoping he could find the man again the next day. The following morning, Mateo got up early and got ready for school. As he ate breakfast, his parents watched him carefully, noticing his tired and worried expression. "Are you sure you're okay, son? You look a little down," his mother said in a concerned tone. Mateo nodded, trying to hide his anxiety. "Yes, Mom, just a little tired, but I'm fine," he replied, forcing a smile. His father looked at him closely. "If something is bothering you, you can tell us. You know you can trust us," he said, reaching out across the table. Mateo hesitated for a moment, tempted to share what had happened the night before. But then, thinking about how his parents might react, he decided to keep it to himself. "Don't worry, I'm really okay. I just had a busy day yesterday and I need a little more rest," he explained, hoping his parents would believe him. Fortunately, his parents didn't push it. They finished breakfast in relative silence, and then Mateo said goodbye and headed to school. On the way, Mateo couldn't stop thinking about the homeless man. He searched among the people on the streets, hoping to see him again, but to no avail. Discouraged, Mateo went to his house, feeling more and more frustrated that he couldn't do anything to help the person who had touched him so much. When he got home, he greeted his parents and quickly went up to his room. Once alone, he collapsed on the bed, feeling the anguish washing over him again. At that moment, he heard a knock on the door. Mateo was startled, afraid it was his parents and he'd have to lie to them again about what was going on. "Yes," he answered, trying to sound casual. The door opened and his mother peeked in with a worried expression. "Mateo, can I come in?" she asked softly. Mateo nodded, sitting up on the bed. His mother came over and sat down beside him, placing a hand on his arm. "Honey, I'm worried about you. I know you said you're okay, but I can tell something's bothering you," she said, looking at him tenderly. Mateo hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should tell her what had happened the day before. He finally decided he could trust her. "Mom, yesterday I met a homeless man on the street. He was sleeping in the park, and I couldn't help but feel sorry for him," he began, feeling the tears welling up in his eyes again. His mother listened attentively without interrupting as Mateo told her everything that had happened, how he had decided to take him home, how he had hidden him from his parents, and how he had finally had to say goodbye to him before they found him. When Mateo finished, his mother hugged him tightly, gently stroking his back. "Oh, my boy, I understand why you've been so worried and distressed," she said compassionately. Mateo clung to her, letting the tears flow freely. "Mom, I can't stop thinking about him. I wonder if he's okay, if he's found a place to spend the night. I feel so helpless," he sobbed, feeling frustrated. His mother rocked him gently, trying to comfort him. "I understand your concern, honey. It's a very difficult situation, and I'm proud that you had the heart to want to help him. But you also have to understand that you can't be burdened with the responsibility of solving all the world's problems," she said wisely. Mateo looked at her with tearful eyes, not fully understanding what she meant. "But Mom, how can I not worry? That man is suffering, and I could have done more for him," he replied, feeling guilty. His mother gave him a look of tenderness and understanding. "Sweetheart, your generous heart made you want to help that man, and that's admirable. But you have to understand that there are many people in difficult situations, and you alone can't solve everything. The important thing is that you've acted with compassion and that you continue to have that spirit of service to others, she explained softly. Mateo nodded slowly, beginning to understand his mother's words. Then what can I do? I don't want to abandon him to his fate, he said with determination. His mother smiled at him proudly. You can continue to cultivate that generous and kind heart. You can look for ways to help, be it that man or other people in similar situations. But don't forget to take care of yourself too, she replied, stroking his cheek. Mateo reflected on his mother's words, feeling a little calmer. He understood that while he couldn't save the whole world, he could make a difference in the lives of those he had the opportunity to help. Thank you, Mom. I will try not to lose hope and keep looking for ways to help that man if I ever find him again, he said with a small smile. His mother hugged him warmly, conveying the confidence and support that Mateo needed at that moment. I'm sure you'll find a way to make a difference, my boy. Remember, your heart is the most valuable thing you have, she whispered. One day after school, Mateo ran into the homeless man again. With tearful eyes, he approached him. Man, you have no idea how much I've been looking for you. I want you to come back to my house for a few more days, he pleaded. The homeless man opened his eyes wide. But boy, you don't really think your parents won't notice, do you? He exclaimed. Mateo convinced him, and so he returned to his home. For the next few days, Mateo managed to sneak the homeless man into the guest room every day after school. His mother and father didn't suspect a thing, so the man was able to stay hidden and rest in the comfort of that luxurious home. Each afternoon, Mateo went up to the room and spent time with the homeless man, bringing him food and making sure he was comfortable. The man thanked him profusely for his generosity and kindness, still amazed that a child like Mateo had taken pity on him. During those private moments, the homeless man told Mateo a little about his life and how he had ended up on the streets. Mateo listened attentively, feeling a growing empathy and admiration for the strength and dignity that the man showed despite his adversities. You see, boy, I used to have a very different life. I had a steady job, a wife, and a daughter whom I adored. The homeless man began one afternoon as Mateo served him a plate of hot food. Mateo looked at him with interest, imagining how difficult it must have been for the man to lose everything he had. What happened, sir? Mateo asked softly. The homeless man sighed, and Mateo could see a hint of sadness in his eyes. Well, a few years ago, the company I worked for went bankrupt, and I lost my job. I tried to get another job, but it was very difficult. Little by little, we lost everything. Our home, our savings, until finally my wife couldn't take it anymore, and she left with our daughter, the man said, his voice full of pain. Mateo felt a pang in his heart as he listened to his story. He couldn't imagine the suffering the man must have gone through, losing everything he loved. And have you been alone on the streets ever since? Mateo asked with genuine concern. The homeless man nodded slowly. Yes, boy. After my family left, I couldn't hold down a steady job, and little by little, I fell into homelessness. I've been wandering the streets looking for work and a place to stay, but it's been very difficult, he explained, his gaze distant. Mateo went over to him and put a hand on his shoulder, trying to offer some comfort. It must be so hard. I can't imagine everything you've been through, Mateo said, moved. The homeless man looked at him with a mix of gratitude and sadness. It's true, boy, but I don't complain. I've learned to survive on the streets. What hurts me the most is not being able to see my daughter. I haven't heard from her in years, he confessed, his voice cracking with emotion. Mateo felt his heart sink as he listened. He understood that, despite the difficulties he faced, what tormented that man the most was the separation from his family. Haven't you tried to contact her? Mateo asked hopefully. The homeless man shook his head. I don't dare, boy. I'm afraid she will reject me or blame me for everything that happened. Besides, what could I offer her now? I'm just a poor homeless man with nothing to give, he replied with deep sadness. Mateo looked at him compassionately, wishing he could do something to help him reunite with his daughter. I'm sure she would forgive you and want you back. You are her father, and parents will always have a special place in the hearts of their children, Mateo said wisely beyond his years. The homeless man looked at him in amazement, as if he had never heard such hopeful words before. I wish I had your confidence, boy, but after everything I've lost, it's hard for me to believe that I can get anything back, he replied dejectedly. Mateo moved closer to him and looked at him with determination. Listen to me. You are not alone. I'm going to help you find your daughter and get your life back, Mateo affirmed with conviction. The homeless man looked at him in disbelief, unsure how to respond to this unexpected offer of help. Boy, I can't ask you to do that. You've already done so much for me by letting me stay here. I don't want to cause you any more problems, he said, trying to dissuade him. But Mateo did not give up. He knew he had to do something to help this man find the happiness he had lost. It's not a request, it's a promise. I'm going to do everything in my power so you can see your daughter again, Mateo insisted determinedly. The homeless man looked at him with a mix of gratitude and doubt. I don't know what to say, boy. Your generosity and your kindness move me deeply. But I fear that not even you can do anything for someone like me, he replied dejectedly. Mateo took the homeless man's hand in his and looked at him firmly. Trust me, I know I can help you, Mateo said without a doubt. The homeless man watched him in silence for a moment, as if trying to read through his eyes the sincerity of his words. Finally, he smiled faintly. Okay, boy, I'll trust you. But promise me you won't get in trouble because of me, he replied with a glimmer of hope in his voice. Mateo nodded resolutely. I promise. I will do everything possible to help you, without risking anything, he affirmed with a smile. The homeless man put a hand on Mateo's shoulder, conveying his gratitude. You are an exceptional being, boy. I don't know how I'm going to be able to thank you for everything you've done for me, he said emotionally. Mateo smiled at him warmly. You don't have to thank me for anything. It's an honor for me to be able to help you, he replied sincerely. From that moment on, Mateo dedicated himself to thinking about the best way to help the homeless man reunite with his daughter. He knew it would be a challenge, but he was determined not to give up. Every afternoon after returning from school, Mateo would go up to the guest room and spend long hours talking to the man. Little by little, he learned more details about his life and the circumstances that had led him to the street. The homeless man, for his part, felt increasingly comfortable and confident with Mateo. He sincerely appreciated the boy's company and support and began to see him as a true friend. During one of those chats, the homeless man told Mateo that his daughter's name was Sophia and that she was 15 years old. He described what she was like, an intelligent, affectionate girl with a big heart who he was heartbroken not to be close to. Sophia was my reason for living, boy. She and her mother were everything to me, said the homeless man, his voice choked with emotion. Mateo listened carefully, feeling his heart shrink as he imagined the deep pain this man must be experiencing. Do you know where she lives now? Mateo asked softly. The homeless man shook his head. No, boy. After my wife left with her, I lost all track of them. I heard they moved to another city, but I have no idea where they might be, he replied, frustrated. Mateo thought for a moment, trying to imagine a way to help him find his daughter. And there's no way to find out? Maybe if we went to the city where they lived, we could make some inquiries, Mateo suggested hopefully. The homeless man looked at him incredulously. Go find her. But boy, how could I do that? I have no money or way to get around. And even if I did, what would I say to Sophia after all this time? He questioned hopelessly. Mateo moved closer to him and looked at him with determination. Leave that to me. I'll see if I can get the necessary resources and help you reunite with your daughter, Mateo affirmed with conviction. The homeless man watched him in silence for a moment, overwhelmed by the boy's generosity and determination. Boy, I don't know how I'm going to be able to thank you for all this. I'm afraid your parents will be upset if they find out, he said worriedly. Mateo smiled at him confidently. Don't worry about that. I will make sure my parents don't find out. The important thing is that you can get your daughter back. Mateo replied firmly. The homeless man sighed, deeply moved by the boy's attitude. You are an exceptional being, Mateo. I don't know how I'm going to pay you, but I promise that I will do everything in my power to make our search successful, he said, gently squeezing the boy's hand. Mateo returned the squeeze with a smile full of hope. You don't have to pay me anything. Seeing you reunited with your daughter will be enough reward for me, he replied sincerely. From that moment on, Mateo set to work planning the search for the homeless man's daughter. He knew it would be a complex process full of obstacles, but he was not going to give up. He began by discreetly researching the city where, according to the homeless man, his wife and daughter had moved. He found out the name of the town and started looking for information about her, trying not to arouse suspicion in his family. At the same time, Mateo also dedicated himself to saving some money. He knew they would need resources to be able to travel and make the necessary inquiries. So every time he had the opportunity, he would save a little of the money his parents gave him. The homeless man, for his part, was increasingly enthusiastic and grateful for Mateo's efforts. Despite his initial doubts, he gradually regained hope of reuniting with his daughter. "Boy, I don't know how I'm going to be able to pay you for all this, but I swear to you that if we can find Sophia, I will be eternally grateful," the man said to him, his eyes shining with emotion. Mateo smiled and assured him that he had nothing to be grateful for, that it was an honor for him to be able to help him. Finally, after several weeks of hard work, Mateo raised enough money to cover the travel expenses. Excited, he shared the news with the homeless man, who couldn't believe the boy had accomplished all that. "Really, boy? Do we have the resources to go find Sophia?" the man asked incredulously. Mateo nodded with a big smile. "Yes, I've saved all the money my parents have given me these past few weeks. I think we have enough to pay for the trip and make inquiries," Mateo explained excitedly. The homeless man looked at him with a mix of gratitude and emotion and hugged him tightly. "Boy, you're an angel." "I don't know how I'm going to be able to thank you for all this," said the man, his voice choked with emotion. Mateo returned the hug, feeling joy flood his heart. "You don't have to thank me for anything. I am happy to be able to help you reunite with your daughter," Mateo replied sincerely. Together, they began to plan the trip. Mateo made sure everything was ready so he could be absent from school for a few days without arousing suspicion from his parents. He also took care of booking the bus tickets and finding a place to stay in the destination city. The homeless man, for his part, listened carefully to all of Mateo's instructions, feeling increasingly excited and nervous at the same time. After so long, the idea of seeing his daughter again filled him with a mixture of joy and fear. What if Sophia doesn't want to see me? What if she holds a grudge against me for leaving them? He wondered worriedly. Mateo, noticing his concern, approached him and offered words of encouragement. "Don't worry, everything will be fine. Sophia is your daughter and she loves you. I'm sure of it. When she sees you, all the pain and distance will be forgotten," he said with conviction. The homeless man nodded, struggling to believe Mateo's words. Little by little, his anxiety gave way to growing hope. Finally, the day of the trip arrived. Mateo made sure his parents didn't suspect anything, and, with his heart racing, met the homeless man at the bus station. Once inside the vehicle, the man seemed lost in thought while Mateo looked out the window with enthusiasm. He knew that this trip would be decisive for the homeless man's life and was determined to do everything possible to help him reunite with his daughter. During the trip, Mateo and the homeless man spoke little. Each was absorbed in their own fears and expectations. The man seemed nervous and insecure, while Mateo tried to convey tranquility and confidence. "Everything will be fine, you'll see," Mateo said, putting a hand on his shoulder. The homeless man nodded, giving a faint smile, but Mateo could see the worry reflected on his face. Finally, after several hours of travel, the bus arrived in the city where, according to the data they had collected, the homeless man's daughter lived. They both got off the vehicle and looked around, feeling intimidated by the hustle and bustle of the new city. "Well, we're here. Do you know where Sophia lives?" Mateo asked cautiously. The homeless man shook his head, clenching his fists in frustration. "No, boy. Unfortunately, I don't have the slightest idea where she could be living now," he replied, anguished. Mateo looked at him understandingly and put a hand on his arm, trying to calm him. "Don't worry, we'll find out. Let's start by asking in the nearby shops and businesses. Maybe someone can give us a clue," the boy suggested with determination. The homeless man nodded, trying to regain his composure. "You're right, boy. That's the best we can do for now," he replied, following Mateo as he headed to one of the nearest shops. Cautiously, Mateo approached the counter, where a woman looked at them curiously. "Excuse me, could you help us? We're looking for a young woman named Sophia. Do you know if she lives around here?" Mateo asked politely. "I'm sorry, I don't know any Sophia." "Are you sure she lives around here?" she replied suspiciously. Mateo felt the homeless man's heart sink at the negative response. He took a deep breath and insisted again. "Well, it's just that we don't have much information. Maybe you could tell us where we could ask," Mateo insisted calmly. The woman looked at him suspiciously, but finally pointed to an adjacent street. Try the market a few blocks from here. Maybe someone there can help you, she said listlessly. Mateo thanked her and hurried to convey the information to the homeless man, who followed him without saying a word, visibly dejected. As they walked to the market, Mateo noticed the man's spirits sinking lower and lower. He understood his frustration and fear, but he didn't want him to give up. Come on, don't be discouraged. I'm sure we'll find some clue in the market, Mateo encouraged him optimistically. The homeless man looked at him resignedly. Boy, I'm starting to think this was crazy. What are the chances of me finding my daughter after all these years? Maybe it's better if I give up and accept my fate, he replied despondently. Mateo stopped him and looked at him firmly. Listen to me. You can't give up. You have to see your daughter. You have to make up for lost time. You can't give up now when we're so close, Mateo insisted without a doubt. The homeless man watched him in silence for a moment and then nodded slowly. You're right, boy. I can't give up. Not after everything you've done for me. Come on, let's keep looking, he said with a glimmer of determination in his voice. Together they headed to the market, where the hustle and bustle seemed to offer more possibilities for finding information. Upon arrival, Mateo and the homeless man split up to cover more ground. They went through the stalls asking the vendors and anyone who seemed to know the place well. However, as the minutes passed, their frustration grew. No one seemed to know Sophia or have any clue as to her whereabouts. Finally, when they were about to give up, an old man who ran a small craft shop paid attention to them. Sophia? Yes, I know that young lady. She lives a few blocks from here on Jasmine Street, the man said with a kind smile. Mateo and the homeless man looked at each other, feeling a ray of hope light up their hearts. Could you tell us exactly where? Asked the homeless man urgently. The old man gave them precise directions, and they both thanked him profusely before running off towards the mentioned street. As they walked, Mateo noticed how anxiety and emotion were taking hold of the homeless man. He could see his hands trembling slightly and his eyes shining with contained tears. We're almost there. Are you ready? Mateo asked softly. The homeless man nodded, taking a deep breath. Yes, boy, I'm ready. Or at least I think so. I'm so afraid that Sophia will reject me, but at the same time I'm dying to see her, he replied, his voice choked with emotion. Mateo put a hand on his shoulder, conveying his support. Don't worry, everything will be fine. Remember that she is your daughter and that she loves you more than you can imagine, Mateo said with conviction. The homeless man gave him a shaky smile and nodded. Together they approached the door of the modest house that they had been directed to, and with their hearts pounding, they knocked on the door. Footsteps were heard on the other side, and after a few moments the door opened, revealing a young woman of about 15 with brown hair and bright eyes. Yes? Can I help you? The girl asked, looking at them curiously. The homeless man gasped when he saw his daughter, whom he had not seen in so many years. He had to make a superhuman effort to hold back the tears that threatened to spill from his eyes. Sophia, it's me, your father, he said, his voice trembling. The young woman looked at him in surprise, and a mix of emotions crossed her face. Mateo watched the scene holding his breath, expectant at Sophia's reaction. After a few tense seconds, the girl reacted by putting a hand to her mouth. Dad, is it really you? She asked incredulously. The homeless man nodded, unable to contain the tears that rolled down his cheeks any longer. Yes, my girl, I've come back, he replied, his voice choked with emotion. Without saying another word, Sophia threw herself at her father, hugging him tightly, while they both cried with happiness. Mateo watched the scene, a smile lighting up his face. After a few moments that seemed like an eternity, Sophia pulled away from her father slightly and looked at him with a mixture of joy and pain. Dad, where have you been all this time? We've missed you so much, she said, her voice choked. The homeless man looked at her tenderly and stroked her face gently. I'm sorry, my girl. I've had to travel a very difficult road, but now I'm here with you, he replied with regret. Sophia hugged him again, and Mateo could see them both clinging to each other as if they were afraid that everything was going to vanish. After several minutes, Sophia finally noticed Mateo's presence and looked at him curiously. Who is he, Dad? She asked, wiping away her tears. The homeless man turned to Mateo and looked at him with deep gratitude. This is Mateo. The boy who made this reunion possible. Without his help, I would never have been able to find you, he replied emotionally. Sophia approached Matteo and hugged him, taking him by surprise. Thank you so much, Matteo. You don't know how much this means to me, the girl said with a bright smile. Matteo returned the hug, deeply moved. You don't have to thank me. I'm very happy to have been able to help, he replied sincerely. At that moment, Sophia's mother appeared at the door, looking at the scene in bewilderment. What's going on here? She asked, bewildered. The homeless man turned to her, and Matteo could see the emotion and uncertainty reflected on his face. Hello, Lucia. It's me, your husband, the man said cautiously. The woman looked at him with a mixture of surprise and rejection, and Matteo knew that the reunion would not be easy. Meanwhile, Sophia took her father's hand and looked at him with determination. Mom, please listen to him. Dad is back, and he needs us to forgive him, she pleaded. Lucia watched them in silence for a moment, and Matteo could feel the tension in the air. He felt his heart beat hard, wishing that the long-awaited encounter would end well. Finally, Lucia sighed and approached her husband, looking at him cautiously. After all this time, do you think you can just come back and expect everything to be as before? She asked coldly. The homeless man looked at her remorsefully and took her hands gently. I know, Lucia. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I have come to beg you to give me a chance. I want my family back. I want to be the husband and father you deserve, he replied sincerely. Matteo held his breath, waiting for Lucia's answer. Sophia also looked at her mother, hope reflected in her eyes. After a few tense moments, Lucia sighed and hugged her husband, taking him by surprise. Welcome home, my love, she said emotionally. The homeless man held her tight, tears rolling down his cheeks. Sophia joined the hug, and Matteo watched the scene, deeply moved. After so many years of suffering and loneliness, that family had been reunited, and Matteo knew that, despite the challenges that still awaited them, together they would be able to rebuild the ties that bound them. As he watched the family embrace, Matteo felt an immense joy and satisfaction. He had kept his promise to help the homeless man reunite with his daughter. Seeing the happiness reflected on the faces of these people was the greatest reward he could have received. When they finally separated, the homeless man approached Matteo and hugged him effusively. Boy, I have no words to thank you for all you have done for me. You're an angel, he said, his voice choked with emotion. Matteo smiled at him warmly and returned the hug. I'm so glad you were able to meet again. Now you can make up for lost time, Matteo replied, feeling his heart fill with joy. Sophia also approached him and hugged him. Thank you, Matteo. You're the best friend my father could have found, the girl said with a radiant smile. Matteo was deeply moved by those words. He never imagined that his simple act of kindness would have such a big impact on the life of that family. Finally, Lucia approached Matteo and looked at him gratefully. Thank you so much, Matteo. I don't know how we can repay you for all this, she said sincerely. Matteo shook his head, smiling. You don't have to thank me for anything. I'm happy to have been able to help, he replied humbly. Lucia looked at him tenderly and then turned to her husband. Well, how about we go in and talk a bit? We have a lot to catch up on, she proposed with a more relaxed expression. They all nodded and together entered the modest house, ready to spend valuable time as a family. As they settled into the living room, Matteo watched the reunited family, feeling his heart fill with indescribable joy. Seeing them together after so many years of separation moved him deeply. The homeless man, now with a renewed and hopeful countenance, sat down next to his wife and daughter, looking at them with a mixture of tenderness and regret. My girl, my Lucia, you don't know how much I've missed you. I'm sorry for all the suffering I've caused you, he said, his voice choked with emotion. Sophia approached him and took his hand, giving him a warm smile. The important thing is that you're back, Dad. We all make mistakes, but what matters is that you've come home, the young woman replied with wisdom beyond her years. Lucia watched the scene with a more relaxed expression, although a certain reserve could still be seen in her gaze. You're right, Sophia, but there's still a lot we need to clarify and heal, she said, addressing her husband seriously. The homeless man nodded, showing himself willing to face any complaint or questioning. I know, Lucia. I'm ready to take responsibility and do everything in my power to regain your trust, he replied with determination. Mateo watched the interaction between them, feeling like an intruder at that intimate moment. However, he couldn't help but feel a deep emotion, seeing how that family, after so long, managed to reunite. At that moment, Lucia turned her gaze to Mateo, and the boy flinched, afraid of having been caught eavesdropping. Mateo, thank you so much for bringing my husband back. I don't know how we can thank you, Lucia said sincerely. Mateo blushed and shook his head, trying to downplay his gesture. You don't have to thank me, ma'am. I did what anyone would have done in my place, he replied modestly. The homeless man approached him and put a hand on his shoulder, looking at him with deep gratitude. That's not true, boy. You were the one who gave me a chance when no one else would have. You are an exceptional being, he said with conviction. Mateo felt overwhelmed by those words and looked down, feeling somewhat uncomfortable receiving so much attention. I just did what I thought was right, he murmured shyly. Sophia came up to him and smiled warmly. You're an angel, Mateo. Thanks to you, my family's back together, she said, hugging him affectionately. Mateo returned the hug, feeling the warmth of that gesture comfort him. He was not used to receiving so much gratitude and affection, and it moved him deeply. As he watched the family, Mateo couldn't help but feel a pang of envy. He, too, longed to have that kind of bond, that strong and special connection that seemed to unite those people. Despite all the privileges his family offered him, sometimes he felt lonely and missed the warmth and complicity that he saw reflected in them. Lucia, noticing Mateo's thoughtful expression, approached him and put a hand on his arm. Mateo, would you like to stay for dinner with us? We'd love for you to join us, she offered kindly. Mateo looked at her in surprise, feeling his heart race. That invitation had taken him completely by surprise. I wouldn't want to intrude. Surely you'll want to spend this moment alone, he replied hesitantly. But the homeless man intervened, looking at him warmly. Please, boy, stay. We would be very happy to share this reunion with you, he insisted with a smile. Mateo watched them, suddenly overwhelmed by that hospitality. After so many years of distance and coldness in his own family, that display of affection moved him deeply. Okay, I'll stay. Thank you very much, he accepted with a shy smile. Sophia gave him a look full of joy and took his hand, leading him to the dining room table. Mateo let himself be carried away, feeling a comforting warmth take over his heart. During dinner, the conversation flowed naturally, and Mateo was surprised to see how that family, despite having gone through such difficult times, managed to regain their complicity and harmony. He listened attentively as the homeless man, now with a name, Ernesto, told them about his years on the street and how Mateo had helped him find them again. Sophia and Lucia listened with a mixture of amazement and sadness, touched by everything their husband and father had been through. At times, Mateo could see Lucia looking at him with a new perspective, no longer with suspicion, but with gratitude and admiration. I really can't believe everything you've been through, Ernesto. I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you, Lucia said regretfully. Ernesto took her hand gently and gave her an understanding smile. Don't blame yourself, my love. I was the one who walked away from you, and I had to pay the consequences. But now I'm here, and I'm going to do everything I can to make up for lost time, he replied with determination. Sophia nodded, squeezing her father's hand affectionately. It will be like that, Dad. We forgive you, and we are happy that you are back, she said with a radiant smile. Mateo watched the scene with a mixture of joy and envy. He wished he could have that kind of connection with his own parents, to be able to share such intimate and meaningful moments. At that moment, Ernesto turned to him, and he gave him a look full of gratitude. Boy, I don't know how to thank you for all that you have done for us. Thanks to you, I was able to get my family back, he said, his voice full of emotion. Mateo blushed, feeling uncomfortable receiving so much praise. You have nothing to thank me for, sir. I'm very glad to have been able to help you, he replied modestly. Lucia also gave him a warm look. You are an exceptional boy, Mateo. We are very grateful for your kindness and your generosity, she said sincerely. Mateo was moved by those words and a lump formed in his throat. Never before had he received so much approval and affection from adults who were not his own parents. Sophia, noticing his discomfort, smiled at him understandingly. "You're like a big brother to me, Mateo. Thank you for everything you've done," she said, giving him a loving squeeze on the arm. Mateo gave them a shy smile, feeling overwhelmed by so much attention. However, deep down, he felt deeply grateful and moved to have been part of such a meaningful reunion. After dinner, Ernesto and Lucia retired to their room to have a more private conversation. Sophia and Mateo stayed in the living room, sharing a comfortable silence. Finally, Sophia broke the ice, looking at Mateo curiously. "Hey, Mateo, can I ask you something?" she said cautiously. Mateo nodded, returning her gaze. "Sure, what is it?" he replied calmly. Sophia watched him for a moment, as if she were searching for the right words. "Well, it's just, I get the impression that you also need someone to listen to you and support you." "Am I right?" she asked softly. Mateo was surprised by the young woman's insight and for a moment felt cornered. However, something in Sophia's understanding gaze made him feel confident. "Yes, you are right. Sometimes I feel a little lonely, even though I have everything I could want," he admitted sincerely. Sophia nodded, as if she understood perfectly what Mateo was feeling. "I understand. My parents have also given me everything I need, but sometimes I feel like they lack time and attention. I guess it's something that tends to happen when adults are very busy with their own lives," she commented empathetically. Mateo looked at her in surprise, feeling relieved to know that he wasn't the only one who felt this way. "Yes, the same thing happens to me. My parents are always working, and sometimes I feel like they don't care what happens to me," he said, opening his heart. Sophia gave him a look full of understanding and put a hand on his. "I understand what you're feeling, Mateo, but you shouldn't think that your parents don't care about you. I'm sure they do, in their own way. Sometimes we just need a little more time and attention," she said wisely. Mateo was comforted by those words and was surprised to notice that despite the age difference, Sophia seemed to understand him better than he understood himself. "Thank you, Sophia. I'm glad to have been able to help your family and to have found someone who understands me," he said sincerely. Sophia gave him a warm smile and hugged him, conveying the warmth and affection that Mateo so badly needed. "You can always count on me, Mateo. You are part of our family now," she whispered affectionately. Mateo clung to her, feeling a comforting peace invade his heart. For the first time in a long time, he felt understood and accepted by someone other than his parents. As Mateo was enjoying that moment, he heard Ernesto and Lucia approaching the living room. They both had a more serene and relaxed expression, and Mateo could see that the tension that had previously surrounded him had subsided considerably. Ernesto approached Mateo and put a hand on his shoulder, giving him a warm look. "Mateo, Lucia and I have been talking, and we want to ask you something," he said seriously. Mateo looked at him carefully, feeling slightly nervous. "What's going on, sir?" he asked cautiously. Ernesto exchanged a glance with Lucia and then turned to Mateo again. "We want you to come live with us. To us, you are part of the family now, and we would like you to stay and share more time with us," he explained sincerely. Mateo looked at them in amazement, not knowing how to react. It had never crossed his mind that this family could come to consider him as one of their own. "But what about my parents? I don't think they would agree to me living here," he replied with concern. Lucia approached him and put a hand on his arm, giving him a reassuring smile. "Don't worry about that, dear. We'll take care of talking to your parents and explaining the situation. We are sure they will understand," she said confidently. Mateo looked at them incredulously, not knowing what to say. For a moment he felt overwhelmed by that unexpected offer. Sophia approached him and took his hand, looking at him with a smile full of hope. "Come on, Mateo, say yes. It will be wonderful to have you living with us," she said enthusiastically. Mateo gave them a grateful look, and after a moment of reflection he nodded. "Okay, I'll stay. Thank you all very much," Juan, he replied with emotion. Ernesto and Lucia hugged him affectionately, and Sophia joined them, laughing with joy. Mateo felt wrapped in that warm embrace, and for the first time in a long time, he experienced the feeling of belonging to a family. That night, Mateo slept in the guest room, but he felt like he was in his own home. The warmth and comfort that place gave him made him feel more secure and comforted than he had felt in his own house. The next morning, Ernesto and Lucia got up early to speak with Mateo's parents. The boy stood aside, feeling anxious about how his parents might react. Finally, after a while, Ernesto and Lucia returned to the living room, where Mateo was waiting for them nervously. "Well, Mateo, your parents have agreed that you can live with us," Ernesto announced with a smile. Mateo looked at them in surprise, unable to believe what he was hearing. "Really? They agree?" he asked almost breathlessly. Lucia nodded, approaching him and stroking his hair affectionately. "Yes, dear. We talked to them and they understood that this is a home full of love and support, where you can feel accompanied and valued," she explained tenderly. Mateo felt his eyes fill with tears of joy. He would never have imagined that his parents would accept something like this so easily. "I can't believe it. Thank you all so much," he said, hugging Ernesto and Lucia effusively. Sofia joined the hug, laughing happily. "Welcome to the family, Mateo," she exclaimed, giving him an affectionate squeeze. Mateo was overwhelmed with emotion. After so many years of feeling alone and misunderstood, he finally found the warmth and acceptance he had longed for. That same day, Mateo collected his things and officially moved into Ernesto and his family's house. Lucia and Sofia took care of settling him in and making him feel at home. Over the next few weeks, Mateo quickly adapted to his new life. He enjoyed family meals, the long evening conversations, and the activities they shared together. Little by little, he began to feel more comfortable and safe in that warm and welcoming environment. Ernesto and Lucia strove to give him all the support and affection he needed, treating him like a son. Mateo, for his part, gave himself completely to this new family, filling the void he had felt in his own home. Over time, Mateo began to notice that he didn't miss his biological parents as much anymore. While he loved them, the connection and complicity that he had developed with Ernesto and Lucia were much deeper and more meaningful. One afternoon, while helping Sofia with her homework, Mateo stopped and looked at her with a smile. "You know, Sofia, I feel very lucky to have met your family. You are the warmest and most generous people I've ever met," he said sincerely. Sofia smiled back and took his hand affectionately. "And we feel very lucky to have you with us, Mateo. You are part of this family now, and you can always count on our support and our love," she replied tenderly. Mateo nodded, feeling his heart fill with gratitude and joy. At that moment, he knew he had found the home and family he had been looking for. At night, when he retired to his room, Mateo felt full and calm. There was no longer any trace of the loneliness and sadness that used to accompany him. Now his heart was full of the warmth and affection that Ernesto, Lucia, and Sofia gave him. One day during breakfast, Ernesto approached Mateo with a serious expression. "Mateo, there is something I would like to talk to you about," he said gravely. Mateo looked at him attentively, feeling a slight fear take hold of him. "Sure, sir. What is it?" he asked cautiously. Ernesto put a hand on his shoulder and looked at him tenderly. "I want you to know that you are part of this family now, and that we love you like a son. But I also want you to understand that you shouldn't forget your biological parents," he explained wisely. Mateo looked at him in surprise, not knowing how to interpret his words. "What do you mean?" he asked, confused. Ernesto sighed and gave him an understanding look. "What I mean is that, while we love you and consider you part of our family, your parents also love you and care about you. You shouldn't give up on them or your roots," he clarified calmly. Mateo nodded slowly, reflecting on what Ernesto was telling him. "I understand, but sometimes I feel more comfortable and understood here than in my own home," he confessed with a hint of guilt. Ernesto gave him an understanding smile. "I know, Mateo, and I don't blame you for that. We are happy to have you with us and to be able to provide you with the warmth and support you need. But that doesn't mean you should forget your parents," he said wisely. Mateo was silent, pondering Ernesto's words. He knew he was right, that he couldn't just replace his biological family. "Do you mean I should go home?" he asked with some apprehension. Ernesto shook his head and hugged him affectionately. "No, Mateo, you are part of this family now, and you can stay with us. But I ask you to maintain your bond with your parents and to give them a chance to get closer to you," he replied tenderly. Mateo nodded, feeling relieved. He didn't want to lose his new family, but neither did he want to completely abandon his parents. Okay, sir. I will do my best to keep in touch with them, he said with determination. Ernesto gave him a proud smile and gave him an affectionate squeeze on the shoulder. That's the spirit, boy. I know it won't be easy, but I'm sure over time, you will be able to find a balance between both families, he encouraged him wisely. Mateo smiled back, feeling grateful for Ernesto's understanding and support. He knew that over time, he would find his place between both families without having to give up either one of them. From that day on, Mateo began to strive to maintain a closer bond with his biological parents. Even though it was hard for him, he gradually opened his heart and allowed them to get closer to him. His parents, for their part, were surprised and moved by the change they had noticed in their son. They understood that Mateo needed more affection and attention than they had given him, and they strived to improve the relationship.